Boom chicka wom wom. Welcome to a new show that's going to break the airwaves. It's the Pom and LekDog show. You've all asked for it. We went out and we created it. We are here to digest our favourite time of the year before we found finals. Me and LekDog was draft and trade content. So, LekDog, talk to me. How are you doing?
Mate, can you believe that the season doesn't actually end after round 22 or 23 or 24, whatever year it is? Like, I always thought that's when the football stopped, and then you get to draft and trade and try and win more games next year. Turns out there's still footy going on. It's crazy.
Honestly, completely fucking confused that no one cares about the draft picks.
Yeah. No one's asked me what free agents we're going to go after or what out of contract players we might be looking at. It's mental,
mate. But the good thing is, right, is that we thank you very much, Rowan. The good thing is we can talk to people about other people's lists and us not care, which is nice, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? Like, we actually don't care. And we start with the Eagles, who, let's be honest, right? They were shocking this year, weren't they? Let's be honest. Like, there's no getting away from it. In a mess.
Had a couple of decent off-season acquisitions, but lost a lot of experience. They're going to lose way more this year. They're lacking depth in pretty much every pillar on the list. One of the least competitive sides over the last 2 years we've had in AFL, VFL history. There's a lot that they've got a lot to address. They've got some ways to do it, but I mean, it's going to be tough, right?
Well, I mean, you look at them and their list is all over the place as well, which is it's a very interesting one here because obviously pick one is probably the biggest subject, isn't it? And you look at pick one, and I can't help feel when we aren't going to be talking about Melbourne this week. That'll be next week's show, but they've got 5 and 13, and you'd say Harley Reid really suits what Melbourne want. They haven't quite replaced Dunkley, a player of that mold, which Harley Reid is potentially going to be that type of player. You just think if they change their draft hand to 5, 15, and 19, it's around where the WA talent is, and suddenly they're going to have to go hard, aren't they? They're going to have to really do a Hawthorn, really, aren't they?
And yeah, so back. Prior to doing this, I sort of had it in my head, they should just take Harley Reid. You just pick one. But now that we've looked through the depth, looked through the holes in their list, I think they're pretty much locked into trading it. They kind of need to trade it just to be able to try and make up some of the talent. I guess the big question is probably for them, and we'll talk about targets later on, but it's can they get Curtin with pick 5, or does he go before then? Because a lot of these teams we're going to talk about lack depth in those key pillars. West Coast more so than others, particularly in key defense. So I think we will see them trade pick 1. I don't think they're going to use it. I think we'll see them trade it, but there's a lot of steps that they need to do. They need to do it in a tiered approach, in my opinion, Pom. So that's go hard at the draft, right? Which they did last year. But they also need to acquire just some established players that can just play games of footy, not necessarily be in the team every week, but just to sort of help protect some of those young players. Because we talked about it off air. I mean, I can't remember the exact stat, Pom, but they have like basically nothing between age 20 and 25. And the young guns they do have outside the ones they drafted last year, they haven't really played that much. They've still been playing pretty old lists and relying on your Shueys and your Reddens last year and guys like that to be key parts of the team.
Well, you look at the players that have left, like Hearn played nearly every game he was available. Nick Natanui would have been every game available. Shuey's played every game available. So, like, instantly they're retired. Then you look at their list as well. Like you say, you look at that core area of age that we always talk about. We know Sauce was a huge advocate of that 23 to 30 years old and above to protect the young players. they don't really have a lot of strong AFL depth in that position that's got the experience. So you would imagine as well, I would say 33, 38, 52 could be used to bring the talents. Like we've highlighted Robertson, Devon Robertson, who, again, he doesn't quite fit the bill of what we're talking about, but he's a local boy, got a bit of AFL experience. Zach Fisher's name's been pandered around as well. Should that be a trade? Matheson, he's been dominating in state league. He's a guy who's probably too good for state football, not good enough for AFL football. So be interesting what way they do, because they really need some fillers, but then they also need some quality youth to come through, don't they?
Yeah, they do. So, look, I think I'll quickly reel off what they did last year in the off-season. They bought in Jordan Baker, Harry Barnett, Kobe Burgiel, Tyrell Dewar, Ruben Jinby, which is a tick, Elijah Hewitt, which is a tick, Jaden Hunt, which is a tick. That's kind of that ballpark of where I think they could do a bit more of that Jaden Hunt-esque stuff. They took Noah Long with pick 58. That was a big tick for them. Out went Hugh Dixon, Tom Joyce, Josh Kennedy retired, Zach Langdon, Patrick Naish, Jackson Nelson, Jack Redden, and they traded Junior Rioli, which helped them bring in Jinby, Hewitt 35 and 54. Then in the mid-season draft, they brought in Ryan Marich, which at this stage you would say is a tick as well. So far, they've lost a lot of players. So Greg Clark delisted, Luke Foley delisted, Hearn retires, Nat Newey retires, O'Neill delisted, Samo Petreski-Seaton delisted, Luke Shuey retired, Connor West delisted, and Isaiah Winder delisted. So they've lost a chunk of players. They've lost a lot of experience over the last 2 years. They've got question marks over Jai Cully, Jake Waterman, and Zane True. They probably all extend, but they're out of contract. And if we look at their needs, Pom, like they need everything: inside mid, general defenders, key defenders, general forwards, anyone who can play football. They need a ruckman that can pinch hit. Basically, the only thing they really have, in my opinion, is key forwards, which they've got a few of. So that's all right.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because like Gavin, he says that they'll trade for picks, and they did. They banked on another flag, which just shows you we've got another team that are a bit like that, have banked on a flag, and are now probably looking at West Coast as where it could go. Because if you don't sort it out, you are in this mess where you've probably got a short space of time to turn it around. You mentioned the players that they've got to re-sign. They don't exactly fill you with excitement anyway, but no. Last year was pretty good. Pretty much every one of their players did get game time, apart from their Category B rookies. Cody Burgiel was in and out, injured most of the year, and Harry Barnett obviously is a project tall. This year, though, they really need to get rid of some of the tosh and probably do a Hawthorn, don't they? And really strip it back, take their medicine for another year, and start building from ground zero, really.
Which I think they're doing. Like you could convince yourself to keep guys like Greg Clark and Luke Foley and Connor West, and like they've had moments and they've shown a bit. You could convince yourself to use them as a stopgap, but it looks like they're really cutting it back. It all stems back to the Tim Kelly trade, doesn't it? That's not the only reason. They traded 14, 24, 37 that year and a future first, and signed him to almost $1 million a year. So a lot of your resources go into that, and it hasn't quite worked. We've listed there Robertson and Curtin. I think Curtin, they need to find a way to get him into this side, because he straight away starts to address that. They need a bit of depth, or people coming through in that key depth defense position. He helps tick that off straight away. But like, I've got names here outside of the ones that you suggested before: Tyler Brockman, Cameron Fleeton, Joel Hamling, Matthew Flynn is a bit of an established ruck, James Jordan, Sam Wicks. Like, I'm literally just like, they're just players that probably can't quite get into their team's best 22, but could fill a role here at West Coast. And you kind of got to take upside swings, and you just can't have what we had this year again, where you're just playing guys who have got 300 games and guys who have got 0 games. It's just not going to work. Carlton kind of tried to do that with their rebuild, and we saw the pain we had for a long time.
Yeah, and I think Jim nails it. Like what we're saying here, they're probably going to look for some offcuts to try and mature their young lads in, try and get them competitive. And Dr. Hines nails it. Their injuries have really exposed the lack of depth, haven't they, as well? So the lack of AFL-ready depth has just been really exposed. We come on to a team, though, that has done the hard bit. North. Yeah. I looked at their list, and I really liked what I see with North. I think they've got the coach. They've got some good picks. We've got the asterisks there because the AFL sort them out a ridiculous comp for Harry.
Ben.
For Ben. Never the same person. They've got a load of contracts up in the air as well. So they've got salary cap to burn. The harder work's done there. The players seem to be developing. Prime picks again. There'll be another team as well who maybe will be looking. We've seen it quite often in the recent years, 2 and 3 used to get 1. This could be another team that might look at the old Harley Reid, mightn't they?
I think so. I think he'll probably end up there. They probably don't. So they still want to churn over as much talent as they can. Positionally, they probably don't need a Harley Reid as much as some other teams. But when he's available to you, you take him. So far, they haven't made any changes in the offseason other than Ben Cunnington, Aaron Hall, and Jack Zeeble retiring. I think Clarko's just taking time to look at the team. Obviously, he was away from the team for a bit. But I liked, just looking back before we look forward, what they did last year. There's a few ticks here for me. They got Blake Drury in a rookie draft, which I liked. Hamish Free. Braden George is a bit of a stash who I think could come in next year and really develop as a forward for them. Cooper Harvey, I liked. But they also brought in these sort of guys. Well, Clarko did. They brought in Daniel Howe, Griffin Logue, Liam Shields, Darcy Tucker, all as established guys to accompany George Wardlaw and Harry Sheasel. So I think all of those, it's unfortunate that Griffin Logue's done his ACL, but all of those have served the purpose. And I really like where they sit. Before we did this activity, Pom, I was thinking, North are shit. They got no players. They're not going anywhere. But you look at sort of the depth that they do have, and I actually quite like it. So for me, for needs, I've got a developing key forward. The blaring one, like they need some outside run, but the blaring one for me is key defenders because Ben Mackay's out. Griffin Logue's done an ACL. Aiden Corr's basically their only key defender. So that's probably where they need to start looking.
Yeah, and you look at where their picks are as well, do you know what I mean, in the draft, particularly their after 10s, do you know what I mean? They've got a plethora of key defensive talent to look at, to build up, do you know what I mean? You've got players like Ollie Murphy in that back end there, do you know what I mean, that they can look at for development. But then they can also look for some established ones from other clubs as well to tide them over, which you'd say would be a highly likely scenario for them. They're going to have a real good draft cast. I do agree with Gav. I think 2 and 3 here, they'd jump the queue for Dan Curtin. I mean, will the Eagles do that? You'd say that's the most obvious one, but if they've got 2 and 3, do you know what I mean? They can go Dan Curtin, they can go Colby McCurcher. I've put there who I think is probably more suited to the needs of North over a Harley Reid. I think they've got them types of Harley Reid players, but Colby is a little bit of a point of difference, particularly with his ability to go outside. But they've got the talent, like you say, forward of the park. It's more that back end, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I actually agree. If I'm North Melbourne, look, Harley Reid's good, but I'd rather pick 2 and 3 because you're either forcing West Coast to trade pick 1 to someone else, or they have to take Curtin with their first pick, and you're going to get Harley Reid anyway. So North are actually in the box seat here because they really need to address key defenders. So Curtin coming into that side alongside a McCurcher or someone like that is great for them. And then they can still target some players from other clubs. Now, I'll say this. There are a lot of clubs this year that are desperate for key defenders, so it's going to be a tough market. We've already seen Port Adelaide put their hands up for Radaglia and BZT and all those sort of guys. But I've listed a few targets, Pom. Let me know if any of these stand out. I don't think all of these are realistic, but I've listed them. So Tom Duday, Caleb Marchbank, Will Gould, Joel Hamling, Tom Highmore, Tim O'Brien. There's a few names there that are like tall, established defenders. They're not great, but they might tide you over for a year or two while Griffin Logue gets back on the park. And then for a little bit of outside pace, I've just looked at like a Lockie Scholl or even a Lockie O'Brien. Just if you want someone who might be able to rotate through the wing But I think it's very clear with them. They've got a really strong draft haul. They've got heaps of players out of contract, but really none of them you're going to miss from the best 22 outside of Ben McKay. It's like Todd Goldstein, Daniel Howe, those sort of guys. So they can go really hard to just try and they can basically outprice anyone in the market for a key defender, assuming that they want to come to the club.
Spot on. A name that I thought of was, I mean, this is a great one by Dr. Hines, Ethan Phillips. He was meant to be the MSD. He was rumoured in the draft. I think looking at the state football, people like Oscar McDonald, do you know what I mean, would be a good little stopgap. He's been sensational for Williamstown. A name I do think in the AFL that doesn't get the credit, Lewis Melican. Can't get into the Sydney
another one.
team. Do you know what I mean? He's AFL
he might make
ready.
His way back. Yeah, he might make his way back down south. I think Aaron Francis is out of contract as well for Sydney. We know they're going to be looking at Brodie Grundy. They do struggle a bit in that department, or they have this year, but they've probably got excess on their list as a whole. So a Melican or a Francis, I mean, I quite like those guys as gap fillers. And the beautiful position of where North is, right? They've got all these long-term assets. They've got all these high ceiling players. They've got all these draft picks. So that it's not costing them anything except salary to look at some of these interim fixes until the list sort of fully fleshes itself out. So, and they've got the upsell of having Clarko there, right? So they're not a basket case. And I'm predicting, I know that there's been some miserable North fans out there and they've had a really poor period and they really want to get a pick 3 for Ben McKay, but I think it's going to turn pretty quickly for North Melbourne.
Mate, I'm with you. I think this is a great one from Damo. Darcy Gardner, he is definitely another one who, them second chance players. Dr. Hines talks about Charlie Dean. He's another one that, it's been successful. Goldie has been linked with Essendon.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, Tristan Xerri, he looks capable. And,
he does.
I'm controversial. Ben McKay, I don't rate him.
Neither do I.
I think Ben McKay literally dines out on his brother's name, but he's serially injured. It's like Caleb Marchbank with us, and we were lucky at Carlton that we had quality key defenders who were reliable coming through the system. Liam Jones and Whittaker in. Do you know what I mean? Then Jones went. We brought in that backup because Marchbank was never fit, and now we've got Marchbank fit. That's a huge risk. We know what it's like when you are relying on staying fit. These players genuinely don't stay fit until their mid-20s when they've got these serials. So they need to get a backup plan, even if Ben was to stay, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, and I agree. And I'm not trying to disparage him, Ben McKay, but he rates elite in one stat in the AFL this year, and that's intercept possessions. And he's pretty much below average across the board for everything else you want in a defender. Maybe that's because he was in a struggling North side, but I suspect it's probably just because he's not that good. I think partially the upside for him is that he's got a good build, but also he's the best key defender available this year. So his market is really hotly contested. So I think they're going to get good compensation for him. And I think they can pivot with a couple of bit players like the names that are being suggested in here. And I don't know if Josh David Kirby's actually joking about Plowman, but he's the type of player that you could bring him in for a year and he will play a defensive role and help be a stopgap next to like your Lockie Youngs and your Aiden Cores and stuff. He might not even play half the games, but you can do that with this list. And so I'm really optimistic for them over the next few years. And if they can address that short-term key position depth need, whilst also going to the draft and getting some real talent in, I really like where their list is at.
Mate, I agree with you. I mean, 70 games as well in 7 seasons is Ben McKay.
Yeah, right. Misses footy.
Which says it all. Do you know what I mean? I think Harry by a mile. And I do agree with you. I think Lockie Plowman, they're the type of players you get in for a year, 2 years. Do you know what I mean? If you got a Danny Curtin, you ain't going to play him key defender. Right? Do you know what I mean? So you want to get him in that third position, right? That third position, that third tour, and have a stopgap. So if that's a Melican, a Gardner, you look at the success that some of these older
Tom
players
McDonald,
as well.
if you wanted to grab him for a year and put him back in defence. Like, there are some names out there, and I'm with you. And we've seen Clarko do that before when he was at Hawthorn, where he brings in those senior established players to support the talent. So, just was surprised at how positive I was about North's list and what they have on their books and the picks they have to use. So, yeah, all positivity here for North.
Mate, and then we come on to the team that I've been super positive about all year. And Gav, you can't diss Aaron Mullet, icon, mate. Aaron Mullet is welcome on this show whenever he wants. I love a bit of Aaron. But Hawthorn, I was really, really bullish on Hawthorn in the preseason. I think that my biggest complaint in the AFL is teams, when they're in a rebuild, fanny around with it, and they take ages and they do it in drips and drabs, and it gradually gets worse. I love the fact that they just threw it out. So there was an asterisk, Lockie. So the asterisk for 3 was in the Ben Mackay deal. Obviously, these will go up +1 if that happens. But as it stands factually, 329.48. They've stripped it back, the youngest list in the AFL. They have thrown game time into their young mids as well. I think as well, what's great about Hawthorn is they've got experience and youth in the same positions protecting them. You know, Hardwick is protecting the younger boys down the back. Do you know what I mean? They've kept that mold. You've got Warple, who, even though he's young, has played a lot of game time in a rigid system. They've really got an open slather here, haven't they, with 3 and 29 to get best available. And plus, they're going to have McCabe in the father-son as well, who's a talented tall and backman, plays both ends of the ground. So they've got that base covered as well. Probably just looking for a bit more protection, aren't they? And a bit more depth to keep rotating these players.
Yeah, so I'm with you about the positivity. I think their list is in a good space. They probably don't have heaps to do. I saw a question about how did they only end up with 3, 29, 48. Someone else can fill that in for us because I don't have it in front of me. You look at the players, a lot of the time I like to judge clubs on what players are out of contract. So Emerson Jecker, Fergus Green, they'll re-sign. Fionn O'Hara, Jacob Kajitsky, Jai Sarong, Josh Morris, Lockie Bramble, Ned Long, Tyler Brockman, who's going to go back to WA. Then none of those are integral pieces of their list. They probably need to look at a key forward. They probably need a couple of job doers like a Jack Nunes type that the Blues went with a couple of years ago. Maybe a mature age backup ruckman. But I think they did it really well last year, Pom. Brought in Carl Amon, Josh Bennett, Fergus Green was a big tick. Carl Amon tick. Henry Huswaite, I like his upside. Bailey McDonald, Cam McKenzie, huge tick. Meek, O'Sullivan, Stevens, Weddle's another tick. And they didn't lose a lot. Like, they lost experience. Howe, McAvoy, Tom Mitchell, Jaeger O'Meara. But I'm with you that I like that they didn't stuff around too much. And I don't think they'll be terribly active. They'll get something for Tyler Brockman. I don't think they're going to be hugely active, but they don't really need to be because they're pretty strong across the board. They just really need to buy some more time for their young players.
Mate, spot on. I think the big thing about them as well is what is really impressive is at the start of this year, right, as the season began, they had a lot of players. They had 12 players who had never played an AFL game. And all but 3 have played this year. Yeah, wow. Do you know what I mean? All but 3. And 2 of them are Cat Bs. So do you know what I mean? Yeah. So that's understandable. And one of them has been injured a long time in Stevens. So who had a delayed pre-season and didn't play any games when he was traded in as well. So I think they've really managed their list well. I agree with Josh. I think Mitch Lewis has really found a gear this year.
He was really capable. They got him in the back towards the back end of a draft. That's just an absolute cheat code. Same. I think he went in successive picks with Souvlaki as well, I believe, or around the same area. So yeah,
it was around there. Yeah.
If you get a key position player at the end of the draft who's really good, like, you win. It's game over.
I mean, I look at their picks, and you know who I could see them taking very early. I could see them taking Nate Caddy. And I know he's one of my faves, But I think, if you paired him up with their forward line at the moment, they've got that conduit, they've got that link, they've got that thread, that bit of X factor. I think it would really, it's a free hit, really, their first 2 picks, knowing that they've got McCabe locked away, who's going to be a real talented player. And I agree with you when you were saying about the players out of contract. They have got a lot of players out of contract that probably aren't good enough, which again shows good list management, that they're not signing players on whims. They have got a real good system there and a real good structure. And I think they've probably set the model. A lot of teams are scared to strip their club back this much. They've managed it well. They have managed it so well to just say, look, we're going to be bottom 4. But
and I think
it'll help us increase quickly.
Yeah, I think you can only... Jack Gunston, another one that they lost last year. I think you can only do that if you're really comfortable with the culture at the club. And, that's an intangible thing that I've never really been able to understand as a Carlton fan, to be honest. I knew that we needed it. I didn't know what it looked like. And they've got it. And I just wanted to touch on a couple of names I jotted down as targets. It's like a Zach Fisher type who... maybe not even best 22, but can come in and play a role, get a job done. And Matty Flynn, who Kieran Briggs is the number 1 man up at GWS. They could use another ruckman, particularly with Max Lynch being forced to retire. They've got Meek, Reeves, but if you could just have like an already established guy come in, and then I've chucked in Buku Karmas just as their key forwards. They've got Mitch Lewis, Jacob Kaczynski, and that's kind of it. So if you could add in a Buku Karmas, then you can continue to develop guys behind him. So, I think their off-season is going to be pretty straightforward, to be honest, Pom. I think they've managed it really, really well over the last year or 2.
Mate, it could be an interesting one. I mean, a name who has been floated around on the back of Port is Mr. Jeremy Finlayson, who is reported to not be happy with the late drop-ins. He would be a guy who I think instantly is a very good forward. He's very strong in the air. He's mobile. It suits the way Hawks play. Nice and quick. I think it could be a match made in heaven. I don't think he'd be excessively high salaried either. So I think it would be a real no-brainer pickup if they could get someone of that ilk. Buku, obviously, I don't mind it, but Hawthorn, they have really acquired players that are AFL quality as well. And at least, with Finlayson, his output is AFL ready. Buku, is that a situation, if you're them, do you go Nate Caddy knowing that at least he's going to get better?
Yeah, Buku's an upside play. But I am with you that, and particularly with like a Finlayson, I think that's not someone that I'd thought of, but I think that's a really good example because he can also pinch hit in the ruck and he can kind of bring you some stability. Like you kind of know what you're going to get from him, which is what they're missing with their tools at this stage outside of Mitch Lewis. So just buys you some time. I think we get a bit scared off as a community, particularly when you look at rebuilding teams, looking at guys, well, he's 30. 30 plus? Why would we bring him into the team? We really missed that. We really didn't have, we being Carlton, we really missed that. We never really bought in the mature age guys. We kind of waited for our list to become that. But I think you can certainly fill some holes if you find the right ones.
Mate, couldn't agree more. And few people arguing in the comments about Harry and Ben, right? I'll settle the debate. Ben Mackay, out of contract, only 2 clubs come in for him, right? Harry Mackay is out of contract. All 17 clubs would have a contract offer on him. That isn't even speculative. That's guaranteed. Do you know what I mean? Harry having a quiet year this year, still ranked top 15 in his department. Ben Mackay's had a good year, just in the top 15 of his department. That's how you compare them. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. That is like comparing a banana with a kumquat.
And the thing about Harry, right? People are only looking at the goal kicking for him. I think people at Clubland know the value he brings, which is the wing, the contested marks on the wing, the relieving, taking a defender away from Charlie. Like he brings so much. His absence for us means Charlie Curnow plays on the wing, which means Charlie Curnow's not kicking goals, which we've seen the last few weeks. So he's invaluable. And I'm with you. If you put him up for trade right now, every single club would come to you with an offer. There's no doubt about it.
I wouldn't mind Ben in as backup, but not for the reported 700k.
And that's a good point, right? He would be fantastic backup for any of the clubs we've listed. But because of the way the market's shaped, he's going to get, $800,000 over 6 years from Essendon or wherever he goes. So in a normal year where key defenders are a bit more prevalent, you'd probably get him in for a cheaper contract and he'd be a really value play. But yeah, it's just shaped out that he's the best KPD available.
Yeah, do you know what I mean? And that's how whoever comes up with these values, Gav, it scares me. I'm with you. 350, 400, I'd be happy to pay, but 700k for a defender, fuck me. I'm turning in my grave. But we've got Gold Coast, who obviously have got the dimmer factor, which is interesting. Yeah. So, I mean, no changes so far because they've got a coach. They've got 12 players, but they do have an absolute plethora of picks. Of picks. Big Arsenal, 15th. These are a weird team, I think. When you look at their list, you're looking at the 6th oldest list in the league, which I think is quite scary. And it's games played as well. It's 12th. So they've got a lot of older talent here. So they're going to have to look to rebuild. They've got a lot of NGA academies, though, this year and next year. So they have got free hits there in the draft. It's going to be really interesting what they do. Because I think when you look at their core, it's nice and young. Your Rouse, your Andersons. Do you know what I mean? They've got some real good youth there who are very top-class footballers. Ben King looks like he wants to stay. That's a huge plus. It's about complementing them now. And I think this is the most important trade window because this could go either way. They could either jump, or if they get it wrong, them Rouse, them Andersons being Vic boys are going to be that's going to be when they start to think, my next long-term contract, is it at Gold Coast or is it in a club that I can see is in the window?
Yeah, I think what you said about the age is particularly, I think that highlights where they're at, right? And that's why I think there's potential for a fair bit of change this offseason. So guys, like there was reports a while ago that Levi Casbolt had locked in a contract for next year, but new coach comes in, that contract hasn't been announced. He's 34 next year. Sam Day's old. Marbia Chol reportedly on the out. They got Sam Collins, who's a little bit older. There's a few question marks over him, but overall, I like the core pieces. It's the supporting pieces and the depth pieces I'm not huge on. So I've got them needing a bit of key forward depth. It depends how you look at Lukosius, but basically when I look at their team for the next couple of years, I just see Ben King and Lukosius as their only real key forwards. General forward depth, again, they've got a lot of guys like Alex Sexton and David Swallow and those type of guys. Probably not quite enough outside running and ruck development because the ruck drop off for them is massive. They've got it's wits or bust for them. So there are some areas to improve. But I wanted to quickly talk about last year. Last year they had all those concessions. They had more list spots. I'm not sure if they all come off the books this year. I'm not totally across it. They had a few. They basically just had a crack at guys for free. Jed Anderson, Tom Berry, Connor Blakely, Bailey Humphrey was a tick. Lloyd Johnston was a tick. Ben Long, Jake Stein. There was nothing that was super duper impressive. And I think given they've got 12 players out of contract, I reckon at least 10 of those guys will probably be off the list. They're your Constables, your Blakeleys, your Steins, your Chartises, your Forkheads, your Days, your Brocks. I think a lot of those guys will see come off the list. So heaps of opportunity for them and Dimmer Hardwick.
It's going to be interesting what he does. And Josh asks, where do we see Bailey Smith going? This is a place that I could see Bailey Smith going. I could see Dimmer. Bailey Smith is as loose as the sense of the word. The closest we've got to an untapped Dustin Martin. And we know that the unlocking of that unlocks Dimmer's system. And I think Bailey needs a change. I think we're not doing doggies today, but I think doggies are a mess.
Yes.
I think they have really got away with murder from their year. I think Bailey Smith could be a watch this space for me. If I was Gold Coast, they would be a team that I'd be having a pipe at, but I wouldn't be surprised to see them leech Richmond. I know the Dustin Martin rumours have been paid, but does Richmond need picks? And Gold Coast have a lot of them. So I could see Richmond maybe having some of them.
Yeah, it just depends who. But I don't think you're wrong. I think it depends who. But like, could they convince a Jaden Shorter of Loston or Abroad or one of those sort of guys, or one of the talls, Ivan Soldo or Samson Ryan? Could they convince one of those guys to go up and Dylan Grimes to unite? I think they probably could. And they've got. So the other thing is, Gold Coast don't want pick 4 because a bid's coming on Jed Walter before that. So they have essentially a free pick 4 to trade away to get one of these guys, to get a Bailey Smith or an established player. So they're kind of playing with house money in that sense. And the beauty for them as well, Pom, right? I've said they need forward depth, outside running, or midfield depth and ruck development. Well, they've got Jed Walter, Jake Rogers, and Ethan Reid all sitting there guaranteed to go to their club, which address those needs anyway. So Dimmer can use 4, 28, 34, 42, whatever. He can be really bold if he wants to do it.
Hey, I'm with you. I think they are going to be very, very. I think they're going to be a very interesting player. Every year we have a team, don't we? That kind of is like the founders of trades, the accommodators. I think Gold Coast are in such a good position with their NGA this year, next year, and I believe the year after. I think 6 of their squad has already made state representation at under 16 level. That they're in a good position there, that they can just piggyback on the end of these deals, be the accessories. And as we know, that quite often presents you some good B-grade players, which only got to look at Carlton. Your Fogartys and them guys that you consider not your A tier are the ones that build a list. And that's something that Dimmer is more than in tuned being at Richmond.
Yeah, and a lot of Dimmer's game plan as well, it relies on even contribution across the board from the midfield. So we'll probably see, like, Matt Rowell won't break the tackle record this year, but I think we'll see sort of, what was it, rising tides lift all boats. I think we'll see all their midfield sort of step up, which is just going to enhance the rest of the list on the field. It's just how they fill the gaps. Like last year, they lost Isaac Rankin. He was the main one. Jack Bowes went out of the side, not that he was playing. So I guess salary cap as well is the other thing, because they're always reportedly tight on salary cap. So we just need to see how many players they cut, or if there's any retirements that Dimmer, does Dimmer say, David Swallow, thank you very much, but you're not coming back next year. We just need to see what happens. But I really feel like they're just playing with house money this year.
I'm with you, and I agree with Hyde. I think the best thing we could ever see in the AFL is open player contracts. We don't need to know the mandatory fee, but the total spent by every club, I would be quite happy with. And I'm sure there's no issues from the AFL Players Association, but it creates that conjecture, because that last year, that whole Bowes thing came out of nowhere, didn't it? All of a sudden, and then it was all preordained. Geelong were getting pick 7. They were accommodating the salary cap. Out of nowhere, that news story appeared and no one did anything about it. It would be great to live in a clarity world where it's a year in advance. We actually know who's spending what. Yeah,
but the other part of that is, right, you shouldn't be able to restructure someone's contract when you acquire them. So they absorbed Jack Bowes' money, but they spread it out across. They extended him for 2 extra years, I think. So really, they didn't actually absorb it. So the 2 changes that I would make, I wouldn't necessarily have to make every player's salary, but I'm with you. We should see Team X has 32 out of 44 players on their list, and they've already booked up X percentage of the salary cap. And again, if you trade for someone, you should have to honor their contract and then add on top of it, not flatten it out. But anyway, that's an aside.
I'm with you, and I think Gab's spot on. This is where I see Gold Coast list. I think on their day, they can beat anyone. I think they definitely need that all-round depth, that ability to be able to prop them up a little bit. Do you know what I mean? Tied them over. So, and I think having someone like Dimmer kind of helps, doesn't it? He's been there, he's done it, he's got the t-shirt, and I think you'll see him bring in some mature age talent to try and help these young talented boys out.
Yeah, I think we'll see. I don't imagine they might bring in one best 22 player, but I think we're going to see quite a few names go up there that either, as we saw at the Blues this year, increase the competition beneath, which increases the quality of the players coming up, or they will be able to break into the side. But yeah, I don't think it's going to be any major names, but I think we're going to look back and go, oh shit, they got, Blake Acres for a third round pick. That was really good.
Mate, spot on. And John asked about Brodie McLaughlin. He has been killing it in the VFL, that mature age player. He's one of them players that I could see, because like Harry's saying, Levi's been fantastic for them. He's one of them players that I could see getting a chance under Dimmer. Do you know what I mean? I think I could see Burgess and stuff leaving to other AFL clubs that are looking to top end and top up, and them looking after Jed Walters and co, but then going in with these maybe second chance players that they already have from within.
Yeah, look, I think that's a good point. If he can break into the side, he was a laid out in their VFL game the other day. I think he hurt his hammy or his calf or something. But yeah, he kicks bags of goals for fun in the reserve. So if he can work his way and be a third tall for them, I think that's only positive. But again, he's already 26 or something like that. So they still probably need. Well, that's the beauty of having Jed Walter, isn't it? That you can have someone coming through underneath.
Mate, it's interesting. They've got Walters, Rogers, Reed this year, who are all landlocked to them. And then they've got probably a project player in a guy called Will Graham, who is a bit like Will Brodie, a big bull type player. So you'd imagine they'll pick him up late. So they've got some real good talent there, especially that Rogers, who is something totally different in anything else they've got in their list. So real talent. But we come to your mate Damo's team, our mate Damo.
I know he'll be in the chat.
And these are probably, and I mean this with all the love and sincerity, the most disappointing side this year. Like, I look at Frio's list, and you know what it screams to me? And I mean this with niceness. It is probably the most polar opposite list we've looked at today, where the top end talent is so good, but then you look at that bottom end talent and the gap between A tier to C tier is catastrophic. Most clubs we've talked about, you can see first 22, second 22, they've either got top 6 or bottom 6 everywhere else in the AFL. They have got a lot of work to do, I feel, Fremantle, with not many picks, because obviously they nailed a trade last year in Jackson, who is superb, but it's probably the worst year for Fremantle to do that trade, given the state of its list.
Yeah, so obviously Luke Jackson, a big tick. Jaeger O'Meara came in as a bit of a stopgap. They brought in guys like Draper and Davies, Corbett, Reedy, Wagner, who played a couple of games, Noble, Williams, but it was a lot of more speculative picks. They lost a lot of B-tier players, as you said. So Akers, Connor Blakely, not that he was playing, Crowd, not that he was playing, but Akers, Lobb, Logue, Meek, Mundy retires, Darcy Tucker gets traded as well. Not all of them were super vital to Fremantle, but when you degrade your depth a bit, you tend to struggle. So they also brought in Ethan Stanley in the mid-season draft, which I liked. So far, they've delisted Eric Benning, Travis Collier at Nathan Wilson. Liam Henry's requested a trade, so they'll likely get a pick and maybe like a Tom Highmore coming back from St Kilda, which would be helpful to them. And then their only out-of-contract players, Joel Hamling, who Damo reckons will be rookie listed. So I think they need a bit of outside run. They need key defender depth. And they need, this is what Damo told me, they need an X-factor forward. They need the next Michael Walters. It doesn't have to be the same type of player, but they need someone that can impact forward of the ball. Because when it's not working for them, it's really not working for them.
Mate, I'm with you. And you know what? It makes me ask them the question. You know, John asked, they've had a lot of players wanting out. It seems to be the players that are probably the most valued at clubs as well. Your Blake Acres, Your Blake Acres is that type of player that every other 17 clubs will say is shit, right? He's your Ed Kerno. Everyone would say shit footballer who's not a Carlton fan. Carlton fans are like, he's a workhorse. You need that grunt. Do you know what I mean? Same with Blake Acres, right? No one's saying he's the greatest winger in the league, but he's incredibly important to your structure and allows the other players to play in the guts and get the ball out to someone. They seem to lose them players that are genuinely valued by a team.
I think the issue is less with there's been a lot of focus on Blake Acres. I think the issue is less on him specifically and more that they've lost a few of those guys. So Blake Acres had a good year for them last year. He wasn't amazing, but he was good. And he wasn't doing what he's doing at Carlton. So, but when you have that happen with 3, 4, 5 guys over a couple of years, all of a sudden doesn't really matter how good your best 22 is, because as soon as you have an injury or whatever, you're relying on a kid to fill a gap. So, I don't mind. I quite like their starting key forwards. I like their starting general forwards. I like their starting midfield. They've got guys like Neil Erasmus and Matt Johnson who might come on. There are guys, I like their backline as well. Young, Ryan, Clark. There are guys there, right? But it's as soon as one goes missing, what's the quality of the next player coming in?
Mate, I agree. And Damo saying Colin Young, that's an interesting development. But it was pick 6 as well, Lucky Jack. It's ingrained in my brain. It is pick 6. But
that's not for this show.
I think what they'll do this year is I can see Devon Robertson. We've listed him. I can see Jeremy Sharp, players of that ilk. But I do think when I look at the WA talent, and this is something that I will praise 304, in the draft, they genuinely go close to home, as do WA. And I think Ashton Moore is the next Walters. So he wanted an X-Factor player. I am a big fan of Ashton. I think for me, he is one of them players that isn't talked about enough, but has everything needed to be a top-level footballer in the AFL. And I think Fremantle, if they can look after him, he can be an absolute superstar for them. And I think that's what they're going to have to do. With 21, 40, 54, 58, you're looking for cut price deals and players that have been forgotten about unless you bring in a future pick.
Yeah, look, I think they're probably not going to do too much this year after chatting with Damon and a couple other Fremantle people. I think they'll go to the draft. They'll draft primarily WA players. They may bring in a Sharp or a Robertson for a cheap pick or something. But I suspect this offseason is probably going to be like a hold. Let's reassess what it looks like at the end of next year, because they do still, while they have some aging players that they will need to look to replace, the core group that they have there that are locked in at the moment are still pretty damn good. Like, I'm talking the names, not so much the product, but your Sarongs, Will Brodie, who barely played this year, Bray Shaw, Hayden Young, Luke Ryan, Jordan Clark. Like, there's a lot of names I really like. It's just, I don't know. I think we need another year to assess it, and then you get all your draft picks back. Then you can really start to make some calls. They kind of a little bit hamstrung with the Luke Jackson trade, which was the right trade. They needed him in, but it just means they can't be as nimble this year as you'd probably like them to be.
It'll be interesting what they do. I think they've got a very important trade period to try and get it right. Do you know what I mean? Dynamic Hypnotic, what's in the thermos?
Water.
Do you know what I mean? But obviously, no doubt, if Damo's in the chat, is there any guys that you value as a third that could help us go back to back? Let us know and we'll pass them details on to Mr. Nick Austin, because Nick Austin will be no doubt looking at anyone you trade out. But we come to Richmond, who were probably the boldest side last year. They went probably more so than Fremantle. They really went out. They brought in Hopper. They brought in Taranto. They had literally one more crack at the granny. They finished 13th. Not many picks. And this is an interesting one for me because I always look at the age profile. When you are looking at the 5th oldest list in the AFL, with the players that are on that outer as well with re-signing as well. There's no one on there that looks at you with an excitement that they're going to re-sign. This is a club here, I think, that have to try and book their age profile, because towards the end of the season, they looked very stagnated.
Yeah, I'm worried about Richmond from an objective point of view of where the list goes. In reality, I don't give a shit about them, but objectively, take a step back. They paid a lot to get Hopper and Tim Taranto in, maybe not enough, and they were both big ticks. Tyler Young was an interesting play. I'd call that a tick. This is what they did in last offseason. Brought in Caelan Bradkey, Seth Campbell, Steely Green, like Caleb Smith. So there's some names there. They might become something. I don't know. Who did they lose last year? Caddy, Arts, Collier Dawkins, Shane Edwards, Kane Lambert, Will Martin, Matthew Parker, Sydney Stack. And then this year, we've already seen them lose Bradkey, Castagna, Cochin, Rewald, and Tarrant. For me, with Biggie Newen, Hugo Ralph Smith, Ryan Mansell, and Mate Kalina out of contract, they've given up a lot of picks to get in the talent. They took a swing and it didn't work. And then I'm looking at their depth. They don't have any key forwards. They literally got Tom Lynch and Jacob Bauer. And I think if you're hanging your hat on Jacob Bauer at this stage, you're in trouble. They're all right for key. They're good for key depth in defense. They're good for rucks. They're good for half-backers. Starts to get a bit questionable with outside mids and just general forwards. Shai Bolton's obviously awesome, right? But outside of him and Tom Lynch, I don't know who's kicking the goals for them. And I just worry that they don't really have a lot of ways to pivot. And I think they may lose another one of these big names in short, Vlosten, Broad, Grimes. One of those. It only takes them to lose one more for them to really be in a position of weakness.
I see Richmond as the team, if you finished anywhere from 5th to 8th, that you're going to try and top up with a little bit of Premiership experience who can also play football today. And that's why I mentioned Gold Coast, like Smegoff does here. And I agree with Gab, fresh coach, fresh ideas. I reckon this is where you try and monopolize the Gold Coast connection. Gold Coast could definitely love a player. You know, like there's a lot of players that I look at them and I think if I'm Gold Coast, what am I building? Nathan Broad would be one of them type of players. Do you know what I mean? Vlosten, Jaden Short that you mentioned, who I'd look to bring in, bit of leadership, bit of quality, bit of now, and it gives us a top 10 pick. But like we've looked at it, like Buku Karmis is one of our suggestions. Like this is
Matt
Richmond
Taverner
Football Club.
Is a suggestion.
Yeah, this is Richmond Football Club. Do you know what I mean? Like a club that has been a staple, and they're used to it. So they're used to getting these big name players, and you're now going to pay the price. And I'm actually glad they're paying the price because the draft should be your bread and butter. And I thought their trade period last year with their list profile, it could have gone another way, right? It could have gone another way that they were top 4 and a dynasty came back. But this just shows you can't buy it. You have to cultivate it. And although Archer Reed, who I've suggested there with their draft picks, could be that key forward position that they want, Ollie Murphy's around there at the other end as well for them to build. I look at it and think, you're 10 picks better than that. You're in the crux of the draft pool. You could really get some real solid footballers straight away to really freshen up the list. But it's going to be interesting what they do. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they have to probably act now or risk going backwards quickly.
Yeah. So they've got Bolter, Gibcus, Young, Miller, Grimes as key defenders. So I'm pretty comfortable with that. But you look at the forward line, as we mentioned before, even if you draft someone, they're not going to impact for 2, 3, 4 years, at which point your Lynches and stuff will be out of this side. They took a big swing, invested heavily in Tim Taranto and Jacob Hopper and the like. Dustin Martin's got a year or 2 left on his deal. He's older. What are they? They're kind of in no man's land unless they do something that we haven't thought about, which they very well might. But it reminds me kind of when West Coast went all in on Tim Kelly, right? After they won the flag. Richmond went all in on Tim Taranto and Jacob Hopper after they won their 3 flags. And you'd be happy with those flags as a Richmond fan. But they need to not only invest in some youth in the forward line, but they also need to find some players who can actually participate next year. If their plan is with a guy like Tim Taranto and Jacob Hopper and Dustin Martin still in that team, you'd think they're not going to just throw the towel in. Like, they're going to want to compete, new coach as well. They're going to want to win games of footy. So how do they both achieve development and that interim stopgap fix? I don't know the answer.
I think they're going to have to trade it out. And I agree with Jimmy R here. Like, to me, Dustin Martin is the most obvious trade. And there's not often we look at trades that are mutually beneficial, but they could bring in a first and a second, do you know what I mean, to Gold Coast. Gold Coast get a very good player who is probably what they lack. With the young players coming through, they've got the guys to learn off Dustin Martin. It works both ways. Richmond then can top up their talent, because I think they need, even when you look at their list, they've still got 7 players over 30 that'll be playing next year. And I look at their depth and I'm like, you don't have the replacements that are obvious yet. So they need to start getting them in. And you look at the good lists that we see, they have the replacements in the reserves, and you can go, right, this guy's 31. This guy's in his 3rd year. It's probably going to be a point now that this guy replaces him. Richmond, they're a stab in the dark, I think. When I look at their players, there's some players there that I'm just like, they could be good. They might be shit. Judson Clark, he's shown a little bit. Tyler Sonzi's shown a little bit. Do you know what I mean? Hugo Rowsmith's shown a little bit. But are they going to trust them in a full 23 season? I don't think so.
No. I think we'll end up seeing, this is what my prediction is. I don't know who the player is. There will be a Richmond player and pick 25 go to Gold Coast this offseason, and back will come 4, 28 and 32 or something like that. It's just, my gut is that pick 4 from Gold Coast will end up at Richmond. It probably won't be Dustin Martin, but I think someone will be tempted to go up with Hardwick, and I think they probably need to do that. They need to try and capitalize on, and they need to generate more assets because they gave up so much last year. But they also won 3 flags, so you can't be complaining too much.
I agree, and I think Jimmy's nailed it. All these teams we're talking about rebuilding have probably got this year and next year at its peak to get yourself in a position to be mid-table and waiting for development. And if you don't, it's going to be a long-ass rebuild when they're coming in with the first 30 picks and the talked about early access and things like that. And we saw that in rebuilds when GWS and Gold Coast came in. It's very hard. So it's going to be an interesting one. It's going to be an interesting one what they do.
No, it's one to watch, and I think they're going to try and be active. They just don't. They're going to have to make a big call to become active, I think.
Well, that is episode 1 in the books. We'll be back next week to smash out the next 6, and we'll be the final episode because we're good. So we'll have another 6, and we'll be back in the off-season, me and LekDog as well, constantly. We're going to have loads of different things. We're going to have some interactive drafting, some interactive trading. But this is going to be a one-stop shop for all rumours and innuendo with me and LekDog taking the piss.
Go Blues, mate. Up the baggers. Saturday night. Let's get it.
Hey, come and see me on the fan cams in 5 minutes.
See you there, my man.
Cheers, guys.